Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, January 14th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at the possibility of the District of Columbia and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico becoming states that would fundamentally change our entire American political system. And this is actually going to be a multi-part series. Today we're going to be talking solely about the United States Senate and the impact of this new additional state in D.C. and an additional state in Puerto Rico, and if this actually happens, what this would mean for the United States Senate and for both parties. Because looking at the Senate results, the Democratic Party has officially won control, meaning now that they are in the majority, they are free to do what they want. It was clear from the beginning that the Democratic Party didn't necessarily want to force a number of Republican state Democrats, such as Joe Manchin or John Tester, to vote on more liberal policies. And as a result, the idea of introducing D.C. and Puerto Rico as states has been something that has been in the minds for the Democratic Party for quite some time now, because it would allow them to have, in D.C. at least, safe Democrats that could vote in a very liberal way without any type of opposition from their own constituents. D.C. is the most liberal part of the entire United States. If it was a state, it would be the most liberal state by a long shot. It is the only electoral body that has never voted for a Republican in its history, never once. So there's a strong Democratic history in the District of Columbia, and it looks as if there was two Senate elections here, it would be the furthest thing from winnable for the Republican Party. I mean, we're not even talking as partisan as Wyoming. We're talking about a 90-point, percent share for the Democratic Party in election after election after election. Even Ronald Reagan, I think, at most narrowed it down to around a low 80% victory for the Democratic Party. So looking at the Senate results in the entire election, it's possible that a number of these senators, and that hits 50, and Vice President Kamala Harris breaks the tie, they vote to make D.C. a state. This would in turn give the Democratic Party two new Democratic senators. And if Puerto Rico follows suit, well, we could actually end up seeing Democrats with 54 seats in the Senate. But it's a little bit trickier than that, because Puerto Rico isn't exactly this state that's going to absolutely be a state that votes overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. I mean, it's very conservative in terms of how Puerto Ricans view on social issues. I mean, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage. These are things that are very prominent in the, would-be state and would, align them with the Republican Party. But I think largely due to the fact that the Democratic Party would be the governing body, and the governing party that decides to make Puerto Rico a state, many voters there will feel obligated to vote for the Democratic Party. I mean, if you're introduced to the Union by the Democrats and the Republicans were firm in keeping you out, well, you may be more inclined to just run and vote with the Democratic Party. So I think that's something that will help the Democrats for the first few elections. But after that wears off, the conservative viewpoints of many Puerto Rican citizens would really put this entire state, I'm going to call it a state for the sake of this video, into contention, both on the presidential level and on the Senate level. So it's not an automatic Democratic victory, every election, but initially I think the Democrats would have the advantage just because there will be Republican opposition to making Puerto Rico a state. It's been, told time and time again to the American people that Puerto Rico does want to become a state. 52.52% of Puerto Rican citizens say that they want to become a state. It's down from where it was before, but then again, the other statehood vote was boycotted. There's actually been numerous referendums that actually hint all at the same exact answer, that overall, Puerto Rico wants to become a state. And, there's a number of referendums we can actually see here. In 1967, this was the last time that Puerto Rican citizens wanted to remain a Commonwealth. In 1993, it came down to a plurality victory for Commonwealth, but no exactly clear victory. In 1998, it seemed as if the none of the above option was the most best one. 46.49% of voters wanted to become a state. And then 2012 rolled around, and it actually became a pretty strong victory for statehood. And then 2017, 5 years later, this was actually boycotted by those who wanted Puerto Rico to become a Commonwealth, or remain a Commonwealth, or become independent. So 97.2% of these voters wanted statehood to pass. So that at that point, it seemed as if the overwhelming, absolute majority of Puerto Rican citizens wanted this to happen, but that simply wasn't the case. 2020 had roughly 1 in 2 registered voters voting, and ultimately resulted in a statehood vote that ended up pretty solid for those who are looking at this and saying, Puerto Rican citizens voted to make it a state, that means that the Senate should vote to, confirm it. It would be done in the House, but we have yet to see Puerto Rico actually pass in the House of Representatives. They've already passed D.C. statehood previously. It needs to go through again, but looking at the Puerto Rico statehood, referendums, these all sort of agree with the Democratic Party that Puerto Rico should become a state in the Union. And so as a result, if the Democrats were able to win both Senate seats, they would get both in the state of, I'm going to say the state just because it's, makes sense for the sake of this video, but for the state of the District of Columbia, or the state of Columbia, I don't really know what they would call it there, but for that particular state, would-be state, the Democratic Party would absolutely win both Senate seats, no matter what. I mean, through the end of time, probably. But in the state of Puerto Rico, at that point, the Republican Party might be able to win over some voters, but I think the Democrats will start out with the initial victories, which would actually put the Democrats at 54-50. It wouldn't be a tie that could be broken by Vice President Kamala Harris. No, this would be a majority of 4 seats nationwide. It would bring the number of senators from 100 to 104. So the Republicans would still have 50 votes, but the Democrats are at 54. This is the effect of having possibly one more senator, in a sense, than the other party has. So 54-50, divide by 2, it's essentially 27-25. It's not the best look for the Republican Party, but if they are able to counteract that, let's say by winning in Puerto Rico, well, they could actually make it 52-52, which would bring us right back to where we started, to save Democratic seats, but Puerto Rico wouldn't exactly be safe for the Republican Party. But if they win it the same way they've been winning Florida and other battleground states, well, maybe, technically it could be considered safe just because Democrats have had such poor luck in that would-be state. But that is all, speculation. D.C. is the only one we know with 100% certainty that the Democratic Party would never lose it, which also may be a reason why D.C. statehood has certainly been pushed a little bit more than Puerto Rico statehood. I mean, both in the immediate future would benefit the Democratic Party, but if Puerto Rico is included, it might actually counteract the D.C. statehood. But obviously, this is just one big game of politics. I don't think really many voters, or not necessarily voters, politicians care about true representation for a number of these districts and commonwealths. There are plenty of other areas that aren't able to vote on the presidential level but can vote in primaries. Puerto Rico's not the only one. Northern Mariana Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, a number of areas around the country where people can vote in primaries, people can become United States citizens. They use the American dollar, but they can't vote in elections. They just can't vote in elections, and that's something that it's not just accustomed to Puerto Rico or D.C. There are plenty of other areas, but there's a reason why the Democratic Party was so focused on D.C. because it does benefit them the most politically. I mean, it's a solid seat in the House of Representatives. It's a solid 2 seats in the United States Senate, and it would put the Democrats at 54. So when we're actually taking a look, we're not going to characterize the Republican numbers just for right now because we don't need to. You can actually just envision this by characterizing all of the Democratic states. But as you notice, as I fill in all of the states that were won by the Democratic Party, not necessarily in the 2020 election, but currently which party holds them in the United States Senate. Well, if the Democrats are already at 50 and you bump this up to 54, can you imagine the majority if the Democrats are able to flip Wisconsin? That's 55-50. Or Pennsylvania. That's 56-50. Or even North Carolina. God forbid for the GOP, Florida. I mean, there are possibilities for the Democratic Party to gain seats in the Senate, and that 54 number is only going to benefit the Democratic Party even more because not only would they expand their majority to, the likes of which we haven't seen in quite some time now for the Democratic Party, let's say the Republicans flip some seats. Let's say they're able to win all of these seats that are remaining. They win the remaining 8-7 toss-ups as I characterize them, and then they're able to flip Arizona. They're able to flip Nevada, where does that actually put the GOP? At 52, but the Democrats remain as well at 52 because they have those 4 senators from D.C. and Puerto Rico. So there's always going to be, some ups and downs with adding 2 new states, but for right now, the Democratic Party would benefit either through gaining seats or just having a buffer in terms of losing the Senate majority. So looking at these 2020 Senate results, these Democrats know that now that they're in the majority, and this is probably the last time they will hold the majority with the House, with the presidency for, these are probably the first 2 years that we will ever see this happen, and then it'll go to Republican control in the House or Republican control in the Senate or both, the same way it was under Obama following 2014. Republicans controlled the House following 2010. But looking at this possibility, I wouldn't count out the Democratic Party making both Puerto Rico and D.C. a state, But the immediate repercussion would be that the Democratic Party has a bigger buffer than before, a larger majority than before. They can expand on it, but they can also lose seats, but not necessarily worry about losing seats because it would bring them right back to where they started. If they just lose Nevada and Arizona, which seem to be the only super competitive races at this moment, we still have to see who enters into New Hampshire, who enters into Colorado, who enters into, Georgia actually would be pretty competitive, but let's say for this hypothetical situation that Nevada and Arizona flipped red, the Democrats would not be, no longer in the majority. They would actually remain in the majority just because of the addition of these two new states. So there's an electoral advantage for the Democratic Party with Puerto Rico and D.C. being added in. D.C. is much more long-lasting. Puerto Rico might last for the initial just few elections, considering the Democratic Party seems to be the party that's fighting to make Puerto Rico a state. But after that wears off, after that, thanking the Democratic Party type of trend in the elections wears off, then the Republican Party will have a very easy opportunity of picking up seats there as long as they play to their traditional values, play to the modern, conservative beliefs that we are all used to seeing. They could possibly win in Puerto Rico and as a result, balance out the balance of power. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my post-2020 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.